Members, we have reached the appointed hour, and we have a quorum. As usual, at the start, I'd like to remind members that if you have any direct and pecuniary direct or indirect pecuniary interest in respect of certain items to be discussed today, please declare your interest according to ROP Section 83A and disclose the relevant interests. And please also take note of the voting requirements or voting provisions in respect of direct pecuniary interests under ROP 84. FCR, Item 1, FCR 2013-14-34, Head 184, transfers to funds. Members are asked to approve a supplementary provision of $40 million to enable an injection to be made to the Disaster Relief Fund under Subhead 999 payment to the Disaster Relief Fund. To answer members' questions, we have the following government officials, and they are Ms. Kitty Choi, Director of Administration, and Mr. David Chiu, Principal Executive Officer. Ms. Choi, please. Thank you, Chairman. First of all, I'd like to thank the Chairman for agreeing to exempt the notice requirement in respect of this paper on the under Public Finance Section 29. A resolution was made to the former Legislative Council to set up a disaster relief fund. This was a mechanism established so that Hong Kong can respond to the humanitarian calls arising from disasters. And depending on demand and depending on the balance in at the beginning of each financial year and also in the middle of each financial year, top-up arrangement can be made. At present, that is a balance of about $9.313 million. As you know, the super typhoon Haiyan attacked the Philippines, and many provinces were seriously destroyed, and over 9 million people were affected. After Haiyan landed, the administration wing liaised with major disaster relief agencies in Hong Kong, and we know that many would like to apply for the funds from the disaster relief funds in order to provide emergency humanitarian relief. According to our initial assessment, the $9 million dollars are not able to meet the applications made by the NGOs, and we therefore need to apply for additional injection. Apart from the disaster relief for Haiyan, we also need to deal with the remaining 4 odd months in the financial year. That is 1/3. We still have 1/3 of the financial year ahead of us, and there may be further disasters. We therefore need to prepare for that. In case from now until 31st of March, there may be other disasters, and some NGOs may need to come forward to apply for financial funding. We therefore want to raise the balance to about $50 million by further injection. Mr. Chairman, our purpose is to enhance the balance of the fund so that disaster relief agencies can respond to the disaster caused by Haiyan and also other disasters. We are not going to give the $40 million altogether to the Philippines government or to the agencies to help the Philippine disaster only. As for the use of fund, it really depends on the proposals of the NGOs. And if the funds are not used, then the balance will be rolled over to the next year. I hope members can support our application. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Choi.
介紹今日陳家強教授
May I also welcome Professor Casey Chan and Ms. Elizabeth Chair. The floor is now open. 10 have indicated that they want to speak. If you want to speak, please press a button. Each member will be given 5 minutes, questions and answers together. Mr. Wong Ko-heng. Thank you, Chairman. Philippines was attacked by a super typhoon. More than 10 million Filipinos were affected. Up till now, the number of deaths and missing persons is really big. And we see that the Philippines was devastated. We would like to extend our condolences to the victims, and we urge them to persevere in times of difficulty, and we hope that they can have a fast recovery. Although the hostage incident has not been fully resolved, this incident is a different matter from the provision of disaster relief. As for the people of the Philippines, we live in the same world. We live under the same sky, and we should provide humanitarian assistance to the victims of the typhoon. But I also hope that the Philippines government will also respond positively to the 4 demands of the people of Hong Kong in respect of the hostage incident. The 2 incidents should be dealt with separately. I therefore will support the funding application. I have 2 questions for this. On this funding application, the administration asked for $40 million. As said by the official, the $40 million will cover the coming quarter in case there are further disasters. And the use of the fund depends on the applications of the disaster relief agencies. I just want to ask the administration how much will be given to support the victims in the Philippines. After today, I hope that the disaster relief agencies will apply for funds immediately so as to help the victims in the Philippines. I just want to ask the administration how much does it want to help the Philippines. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, Mr. Wong. The DRAF has never set a certain amount for a particular disaster. Say we put a cap on helping the disaster. We just top up the fund until it reached the level when it started. We have liaised with several agencies, and we know that several will make applications next week. The preliminary estimate is about $14 million. and we don't know whether there are other agencies. A few have told us that they are considering. So to give Mr. Wong a simple answer, we don't put a cap. It all depends on the applications made by the relief agencies. And then the DRAF will assess and vet the application and try to make sure that the money is well spent and there is no duplication. Now, disaster relief is very urgent, and I urge the agencies to apply as soon as possible. Next, Mr. Ip Kok Him. Thank you, Chairman. The DAB supports the application. The money will be put into the fund, as said in the paper. This is to respond to humanitarian relief calls. The natural disaster or natural disasters have caused a lot of suffering to different peoples and different countries, and we do need to help them on humanitarian grounds.
4,000萬呢？如果你話將呢4,000萬就係
Concerning the $40 million, if they are to be allocated all for the Philippines, then we have to be very careful in deciding that. With regard to the hostage incident in the Philippines, many have certain feelings and many have different views. I think the DRAF will have to consider public sentiment. Now, I have this question. Now, according to paragraph 8, if an individual disbursement is more than $8 million, then the administration will have to come back to the FC. Is my understanding correct? Another question is this. Concerning the voluntary agencies, I hope that the breakdowns of their applications can be made available to members of this council and also make known to members of the public. Is there a mechanism to do so?
Ms. Choi, I would like to thank Mr. Ip Kok Him for his question. Well, Mr. Ip is right. According to the paper, if an individual disbursement exceeds $8 million, then we need to come back to the Finance Committee for approval. That is for each disbursement. So ever since 1993, this fund has been operating. According to our experience, many relief organizations have made applications to us, but those application sums have not exceeded $8 million. So that's why we have not asked for a delegation of authority. And for your second question, for the DRF Advisory Committee, if it's approving applications, each time we will hold a press conference where we'll tell the public what organizations have been granted the funds, and later on we can give you another paper on this. And each year, we will upload an annual report onto our website, and also we will hold a press conference. Now, the DAB is very concerned about this. I hope you can relay this message to the DRFAC. Thank you. No problem. Mr. Wong Yok Man. Thank you, Chairman. I object to this supplementary funding. the reason is very simple. Well, last time it was $100 million, and we rejected that. That was to be given to the Sichuan provincial government. But last time we rejected it. But there were too many members on the other side, so that's why it was passed. So how can we adopt double standard? Well, people talk about patriotism. Last time, for giving money to Sichuan, we objected to that. And now, how can we approve giving money to the Philippines? And second, we have not resolved the hostage-taking incident yet. But people would say that, well, that was the government problem, and now it's about the people. But I do not see things like that. Well, the relief organizations will be applying for the funds, but they will be helping the Philippines. So I think we really should stand firm. I would like to cite a paragraph written by a blogger. Well, Hong Kong is flooded by pseudo things. Well, they impose their moral standards on Hong Kong people. And Hong Kong people are accused of not being compassionate enough. This is a terrible form of violence. By not giving money to the Philippines, is it because we are too angry? Well, maybe that's true. But however, we have thought in moral terms, we can be compassionate. But if we reject to give money to the Philippines, that is also acceptable, because if we still harbor hatred, I think we really should not do that. This is written by a young blogger. And this has been circulated widely on the web. Well, I think this is quite inspiring. I have a suggestion. We have more than 100,000 Filipino domestic helpers in Hong Kong. And we feel their love. And I think the employers of Filipino domestic helpers should be donating money to the helpers so that these Filipino helpers can send the money to the Philippines. This can show the compassion of Hong Kong people. Why do we have to give them $40 million? So how much the mainland Chinese government is donating to the Philippines? Do you know? Can you give me a figure? $200,000 US. And we are talking about $5 million US. The GDP of China ranks second in the world. Why do we have to spend so much money? And how much would be considered enough? $40 million? So $200,000 US would be regarded as a small amount, and now we are giving out $5 million US. So do we really have to show that we are very compassionate and we have to do this on humanitarian grounds? We have not settled our old score yet. Well, what has the Filipino president done to us? What attitude has he been adopting? Well, people would say that you should differentiate these two issues. Well, I would not do that. This is not negotiable. Well, you can really talk. You are very concerned about the hostage incidents and you want to do justice to Hong Kong people. So now we have to show them our stance. Just give them $200,000. $40 million is definitely not acceptable. Well, I would like to clarify a point, Mr. Wong. In my opening speech, I also mentioned this. Now, we are asking members to approve a supplementary provision of $40 million, but it doesn't mean that this $40 million would be given to the Philippines because of the typhoon disaster. Yes, you say that this $40 million will just be injected into the fund, and now because the fund balance is not enough, but this is related to the typhoon disaster in the Philippines. It is related, right? So if you just give them $5 million or $10 million, then you do not have to seek funding from us. Well, in my opening speech, I also mentioned this. The balance of the fund is $9.3 million at the moment. And when we called the relief organizations earlier this week, up to now, 3 to 4 of these organizations have said that they are preparing to make applications. And now the amounts already exceeds $14 million. So we do not have enough money in the fund. And according to my record, the spokesperson of the Chinese government said that the Chinese government will be donating $10 million. Well, Mr. Wong, if you want to ask other questions, please wait for the next turn. $200,000 would be okay. Well, first of all, I would like to send my condolence to those suffering from the typhoon disaster. And on humanitarian grounds, we support the funding. We support the injection of funds into the disaster relief fund. But I don't think Mr. Choi has given us, or Ms. Choi has given us a very satisfactory answer. Well, you make me feel that this fund is very passive. The organizations can come to apply for grants and there is no cap. So for relief operations, I think you really have to strike a balance. We have to look at the international community. We should make reference to their practice. So how much are other countries paying? And can we take reference from them? So can we cap the funding that will be given to the Philippines? Yes, we should provide them with emergency relief. That is necessary. But this is a general question. This is not particularly about the Typhoon Haiyan. Well, if other countries know that we have such a practice in Hong Kong, then presumably if a country always suffer from natural disasters and whenever they have a disaster, they will come to Hong Kong because we have no cap on our relief funding. So is there a problem with this policy? Well, should we look at our own affordability and should we also look at other countries' practices? We have to strike a balance. And we also have to analyze the situation. So for each case, we should think of a cap. Well, you can say that now it's already $14 million, so we should inject more money into the fund. Well, people are very concerned about how the money is used. We are talking about the reasonableness. In 1993, there was a legal resolution, and in it, it was stated very clearly that the fund was to provide emergency humanitarian aid, and we will have to look at the needs of the victims as well as the balance of the fund. And for each fiscal year, there will be injections. Now, the Philippines have suffered from typhoons, and there have been earthquakes and drought on the mainland. So for each disaster, the number of people affected would be different, and the affected areas' problems would be different. So when we look at the financial planning, it is very difficult for us to cap the amount of relief for a certain disaster. But the advisory committee is very stringent when it comes to approval of grants. For the relief organizations, well, some may want to buy rice and another may also want to buy rice for the victims, so we will try our best to coordinate. Well, can you give me a direct answer? What is the scale this time, according to the information you have in hand? Now, you have your past experience. You knew the scale of the past disasters and the relief funds given. So can you tell me what exactly is the amount this time? The government should take reference from your past experience. And there are also international practices. You should know the influence of these disasters and your own affordability. So you should make assessments. Thank you, Mr. Sin. Well, if I can compare an apple to an apple, then in 2013, January, there was another typhoon that hit the Philippines. At that time, 4 relief organizations came to apply for grants. Well, at that time, they applied for $11 million, and that disaster was not as strong as this one. But Typhoon Haiyan is the strongest typhoon that has taken a landfall. And now the organizations have said that they will apply for $40 million in total. Other organizations may also come to make applications, but they may not have the expertise in providing emergency relief. So I think the total amount may be about $20 million. So this is humanitarian aid. So I would support the application for injection. Because when it comes to humanitarian aid, we are not talking about their government. We are talking about the people who suffered from the natural disaster. I have 3 questions. First of all, now we are talking about helping this typhoon victims. So how can we assure that the money will reach the victims? Well, we really do not have enough confidence in the Filipino government. And I think Mr. Sin's question was not answered. Well, you talked about the other typhoon that happened in January 2013, and at that time they applied for $11 million. So did you give them $11 million? And what kind of criteria did you adopt for assessment? Now, if the organizations are applying for $30 million this time, would you give them $30 million? So what kind of factors will you take into consideration? And now you're applying for a supplementary provision of $40 million. The public may feel that this $40 million will all be given to the Philippines. So the government officials have to clarify this point for a number of times. Now you have a balance of $9.3 million, and this is not enough to meet the needs of future applications. So if the balance is at that level, maybe you should consider the issue earlier. Well, for example, when the balance level has dropped to $20 million, you should already come to us for application, because now you are giving people the impression that you will be giving this whole sum of supplementary provision to the Philippines. Well, I would like to answer the third question first. For this disaster relief fund, well, we have a mechanism which is very flexible. We have a top-up mechanism. Well, earlier this year, we knew that the fund will not be able to meet the needs of all the relief organizations. So we have already talked to Professor Chen Ka-Kung, and he has already approved a supplementary provision of $10 million. So if it is not because of this disaster, we will be able to hold until the end of the fiscal year. And now we have made an assessment, so now that's why we are going to apply for extra funding.
As for giving the help to the people, in fact, the DRFAC requires the relief organizations to provide the details and timetable, procedures. We require all the details. If there is any departure from the timetable, agreement has to be sought from the DRFAC, and the relief organizations will have to provide a report within 6 months, and audited accounts will have to be submitted to us as well. according to our experience, the materials are able to reach the victims. As for the $11 million in early 2013, $11 million were the final sum. As for the 4 relief agencies, did they apply for $11 million at the start? I don't have information in hand. Probably there might be certain duplications, and the DRFAC cut the duplications. The application by each applicant is dealt with individually or separately, but we also look at the overall situation. Mr. Tony Che, I support the application for injecting $40 million into the DRAF. And this will enable the provision of help to the victims in the Philippines. In dealing with the hostage incident, the Filipino government was not positive, was not cooperative, nor helpful. We have a tense relation with the Filipino government. The SARG might impose sanctions against the Filipino government. But Hong Kong people are sympathetic. And they all, I believe they all support giving a helping hand to the victims in the Philippines. And I do agree with the members who have spoken before me. This is a top-up arrangement. The $40 million seem to be given to disaster relief in the Philippines. The administration says that it is difficult to put a cap. But I think in terms of donation, you must have a policy and you must have a cap. And you should not just approve what is asked for. I hope the administration will consider this. There is a need to consider how far we can go in terms of helping. We don't know what will be in the future, and we cannot say we can provide unlimited support in terms of disaster relief. In early May, the administration also went before the FC to inject $100 million into the DRF in order to provide emergency relief to the Sichuan earthquake. We were concerned whether the money could be spent directly on the victims. The secretary, or rather the director, has already explained that there is a sound mechanism to make sure that money will be spent on the victims. But members still have a little bit of concern. We understand that there may not be adequate framework in governing the use of money by the Philippines government. I hope the administration would enhance the management of the disaster relief efforts to make sure that the money will be given into the hands of the victims in the Philippines. I hope I urge the administration not to spend all $40 million on disaster relief for the Philippines. My simple response is that we allow the relief agencies to apply for financing for disaster relief efforts in the Philippines. The money will not be given to the Philippines government. Mr. Lee Cheuk-yen, the Labour Party is the view that an international city should have the generosity of an international city. We have to observe humanitarian principles. I've said that many times before. Hong Kong is an international city. The SARG, in particular, should support the international community not only in terms of disaster relief, but also in terms of the rule of law, or in terms of development. I think we should have a certain sum of money for supporting development. We shouldn't just respond to disaster relief. We should help poor communities to get out of poverty. We shouldn't just limit our efforts to dealing with disasters. I hope that we will have a fund not only for disaster relief, but also for development. But it may be just a waste of breath. Mr. Lee, please speak to the question. In fact, that is the World Bank and also Asian Development Bank, and we also provide funding. Well, yes, it's done by Asian Development Bank, and we also give support to them. But I think the SARG has little to support development. With regard to the principle of humanitarian assistance, we sympathize with them, and a lot have died, and a lot have been rendered homeless. They don't have fuel, they don't have food, they don't have a roof over their heads, and therefore we really need to help them. Some say the Filipino government, in particular Aquino III, looked down upon Hong Kong, humiliated Hong Kong people. They don't resolve the hostage incidents. They don't address the demands of the victims in the disaster, or also the victims in the hostage incident, nor the demands of the families of the victims. I think we should sanction the government, but we should also help the people in the Philippines. We help the people there doesn't mean that we will not impose any sanction against the Filipino government. They are two different things. We should continue to impose sanction on the Filipino government. We should set a deadline. If they don't respond, we'll impose sanction. While there are so many victims, we should provide help. Can you explain what is the relationship between the sanction and disaster relief? Will they go in parallel? The director. Well, I can only say this. The CSOA and also the Secretary for Security have already stated their position on the hostage incident. It is entirely different from the present application for disaster relief. Yes, we should separate the two things. The two should go in parallel. It will not change our stance in respect of imposing sanctions. And through sanctions, we hope we can seek justice for the victims in the hostage incident. The core value of an international city should include a concern and care for the world and for people in other parts of the world. And we hope we support disaster relief. The money is not to be given to the Filipino government, but only to be given to the disaster relief agencies. Next, Mr. James Hian. The Liberal Party has all along supported the administration's application for funding to support disaster relief. In the previous application process, we asked the same question. Can the money go directly into the hands of those who need the help? in the disaster relief process, how do the relevant agencies of governments handle the money? Now, the administration just give us the official reply. There is a set of rules and procedures. Indirect costs and administrative costs can only account for 5% of the total grant. We support that. Now, members mentioned the hostage incident. The handling of this incident showed that the president and also the government of the Philippines were not so proper in dealing with such matters. And I just want to know whether our government has any kind of assurance that the money will go into the hands of the victims, basing on the past performance of the Filipino government. We really doubt whether we can really observe the 5% rule for administrative and other costs. I hope you can explain that to us. Thank you, Chairman. As said in the paper, after the completion of the relief program, the relief agency has to provide a report within 6 months. The Secretariat will circulate the report with the DRFAC. Every year, the Audit Department will audit the DRF and seeks the reports and accounts of the agencies to do further vetting. We have not found any exceedance of 5% in respect of overheads or other administrative costs. As for the purchase of materials, say if there is any thing fall short of that, the fund will ask for refund. We're certain that this monitoring mechanism is effective. The large-scale relief effort was the Sichuan disaster relief. And after the relief efforts have been completed, we found that certain arrangement by the Sichuan government was not satisfactory. In view of has the administration learned the lessons from that? Thank you, Mr. Tian, for the question. Let me clarify this point. Last time when we asked for supplementary funding of $100 million, it was for the Sichuan government. It was a donation on the government level. This time, we only asked for topping up the fund so as to enable NGOs, voluntary agencies, disaster relief agencies to apply for funding. So it is different. As for the $100 million for the Sichuan government, Sichuan provincial government, they attach importance to that. They specifically set up a separate account for the donation, and there is tight supervision. Now, the account was under the Hong Kong Macau office of the provincial government, and they told us that the donation would be spent on medical, transport, firefighting, environmental hygiene, and other disaster relief materials. This is a government-level donation. Last time we explained that we didn't ask for a report within 6 months, but we asked for a report after the completion of the relief program. This is the usual practice if we provide funding to other governments. We are about 6 months or so from the 20th of April. So the point is we don't accept application from the Filipino government. No.
Mr. Christopher Chang. Well, this is an urgent matter, so we have to react fast. The Philippines are hit by a super typhoon. We have seen the devastation on news. This is an unprecedented disaster, so the victims really need help. Now the government is asking for a supplementary provision of $40 million. This is a good thing, and I support that. But can the government explain to us why the government is not making a donation in the government's name? Why is it only asking the relief organizations to come for applications? For the South Asia tsunami and the typhoon in Taiwan, etc., the government made direct donations to the affected governments. This time around, is it because of the hostage incidents? That's why our government is not making a direct donation. So would these mislead the Filipinos? Would they think that we are cold-hearted, and they would think that the money comes from the relief organizations and is not from the Hong Kong people? I would like to thank Mr. Zhang for his question. As for international humanitarian aid, well, they have always adopted different channels. Now, many international relief organizations have gone to the Philippines. Some of them have been distributing needy materials. Some of them have been providing healthcare services. Some of them have been sending aircraft carriers, etc. Ever since the establishment of this fund in 1993, most of the applications came from relief organizations. After Haiyan took a landfall, many international relief organizations have already called on countries and people to give donations. So we think that if we give money to the relief organizations for disaster relief, we think this is an appropriate way of doing it. Ms. Emily Lau. Now, Hong Kong is a member of the international community. We should shoulder our responsibility. So I support the government's application this time. The director said that, well, before the 31st of March next year, still there may be other disasters. So we really need to top up the fund. So if there are other disasters and the victims need our help, I hope you would come back to LegCo to explain to us. Hong Kong is a wealthy city. Although over 1 million people in Hong Kong are in poverty, yet our society is still very rich, so we should help others. Yet I have heard the public's views. Well, they are very concerned because they think the Filipino government is very corrupt, so the money would not eventually reach the hands of the victims. So now the NGOs and the relief organizations will be coming for applications. They have their relief programs. So are there procedures adopted by the SAR government so that it can ensure that the money would not be squandered? Well, when we vet the application forms, we would ask them to give us a timetable. They also have to let us know the cities and provinces that are to be covered, the number of victims to be assisted, what kind of materials will they be buying, including bags of rice, shampoo, or medicine, etc. So all these will have to be set out in details. And after 6 months of the relief program, the relief organizations would have to submit a report to us, and photos as well as detailed reports will be given to us. And also, this would have to include an audited statement of accounts. So when we look at the application form, we would know that whom they are going to help and what kind of materials will be given to the victims. Well, yes, they are going to buy those materials, but I don't know where those materials will go to. So if we can track the way they are doing things, then I think the public can rest assured. Well, we want to help the victims. If we can get a guarantee that the money and the materials will reach the victims as soon as possible, then we can be reassured. Now, in the past, organizations have applied for funding, so those were traceable, right? Yes. Because for most of the relief organizations that came to apply, they were very experienced organizations. They have an extensive and complete distribution network. So actually it is better for the relief organizations to do this kind of work because they can ensure that the money and relief materials will reach the victims directly without going through the local government. Next, Dr. Lo Wai Kwok. So in enclosure 1, we can see grants from the Disaster Relief Fund from the 1st of April to the 11th of November this year. And a total of $150 million have been spent. Most of them were for relief organizations, but there was a direct donation of $100 million to the Sichuan province. We can still remember this very well. This was approved on the 3rd of May this year. It was for the earthquake victims in the Sichuan province. So the FC approved the funding in May. On that day, we also heard objection voices. Some people were worried that, well, in view of the Sichuan earthquake 5 years ago, well, our donation might have gone into the wrong hands. So we really want to see where our money will go. On the 17th of May, together with the chairman of the Institute of Engineers, we went to the city of Ya'an and we visited the site of the Chinese medicine hospital. We also went to the epicenter of the earthquake, Lushan. We witnessed a number of relief programs there. We also looked at the buildings affected by the earthquake, and some of the building structures were severely damaged. That's understandable because the earthquake was severe. And when we went to the epicenter, we saw the situations of the victims. That was really staggering. Well, there were some villages on the mountains, and basically all the farmers' houses collapsed. And we made a donation of $100 million to them, and I think that's really worthwhile. I also saw some relief materials from Hong Kong in those villages. As for the 512 relief program, well, on the 17th and 18th, I went to of May, I went to Ya'an. I witnessed that. Because I'm a member of the relief program under the Institute of Engineers. The engineers in Hong Kong also made monetary donations to Sichuan. So when I went to Ya'an, I also witnessed the participation of Hong Kong engineers. They provided technical support to the people there, and this was also covered by the press later. So today is a good opportunity for us to talk about this again. This is my personal experience. And I think that the monitoring work has been done well. So when it comes to emergency reliefs, sometimes we really cannot ask the relief organizations or the local governments to give us all the details, but at least we should know where the money has gone to. The government official told us that for this $100 million that was donated to Sichuan, that has been followed up. So I think that's okay. And also, we support to top up the fund, that is members of the BPA, because now the balance is only at $9 million. I don't think that's not enough to provide support to the relief organizations. Well, in recent years, we have seen different forms of natural disasters, and the disaster relief fund can really help. So I think we should maintain a reasonable balance in the fund. As for the support given to the Philippines, I'm sure in the future will come back to report to us. Dr. Priscilla Lang. I am a member of the DLFAC, so I have to declare this first. And with regards to this disaster in the Philippines this time around, I would like to say this. Well, there are many Filipino domestic helpers in Hong Kong, so we really have a close tie with this country. It's different from other third world countries, in particular our next generations. So when this happened to the Philippines, we are really sad. Yes, Hong Kong people are very angry at their government, but we have to calm down. We should not be angry at the people. Actually, many of the Filipino people are angry at their own government. Well, I am actually quite fortunate. I have some Filipino domestic helpers at my home. They are really dutiful. And I have also seen many good examples. I remember there was a Filipino helper that has found $300,000 on the street, and she gave it back to the original owner. She was only given a box of a cookie in return. So they are really good-hearted people. So now the Filipinos are suffering from this disaster. Many Filipinos have contributed a lot to Hong Kong families. So I am willing to support them during difficult times. I have been a member of the advisory committee for a year. And I'm not biased. I remember we have rejected a number of applications, but now we are encouraging relief organizations to come forward to make applications for the Philippines. But it doesn't mean that we will always approve their relief programs. If they do not give us clear information, we will reject their applications, and we may ask for more detailed information.
Now, after we have approved the funds to the agencies, some recipients even don't know that the funding comes from Hong Kong. So we ask the agencies to mention that the funding comes from Hong Kong. We also encourage members conduct visits if we are concerned, so that the recipient countries and recipients know that the assistance comes from Hong Kong. I think the present issue should be separated from the hostage incidents. I support the funding. Okay. 6 members want to speak. Please take note that we have just 1 hour left, and we still have 2 items outstanding. The next, Dr. Kenneth Chan. Thank you, Chairman. My Philippine helper's family is affected by the typhoon. They lost contact for more than 10 days. Finally, my helper is able to identify her families. We really need to provide help to them. Either you can help your home helper how to deal with her worries about her family members in the Philippines. You can also help them, help your helper to help their families. You can also provide arrangement. You can support fundraising on the civilian level. On the government level, I agree that we should work through the disaster relief fund. We don't give the money directly to the government officials of the Philippines and let them decide how to use the money. We provide funding to reliable civilian agencies to provide disaster relief. They have teams on the ground to monitor how the money is well spent. We should tell the public the whole mechanism, how the whole mechanism works. We don't give money directly to the Filipino government, whether it's central government, local government. We give finance to the agency. I want to get an undertaking from the administration. We will only approve funding. We have to make sure that the application by the NGOs are not an application on behalf of the local governments. The application, the funding will be given to the NGOs, and the NGOs will provide direct relief to the victims. I don't think there is any difficulty for the civic party to support the funding. 1 year ago, concerning the Sichuan funding, we base it on the same principle. We want the money to be given to the NGOs. There is a framework to regulate these NGOs, and the direct costs and the overheads and administration costs will not exceed 5% of the funding. This is in line with our established principle. In terms of the framework, the system, and the use, we believe we can support the present application. Now we work through the DRF to deal with natural disasters. But what about wars? What about, say, the war in Syria? There are people fleeing wars. Now we have international organizations pleading for help. So from the humanitarian perspective, will the administration also consider the consequences arising from international crisis or wars? Thank you, Mr. Chan, for the question. I can confirm and I can guarantee that when the relief agencies apply for funding, they do not apply it on behalf of the local government. The relief agencies will make use of their network to provide disaster relief directly to the victims. As for humanitarian crisis, the resolution in 1993 was this: the agencies would only apply on the basis of humanitarian grounds. Political factors will not be affected. It is for sudden disaster. It is not for continuous difficulties. If it is because of civil war or long-term problems, if it is not because of a sudden disaster, then according to the resolution in 1993 under the Public Finance Ordinance, such areas are not covered. I don't have enough time. I think the administration should review its policy. It was a decision in 1993. We should be forward-looking. Your time is up. Next, Mr. Albert Chan. Mr. Chairman, let me ask the administration. Now, wars are the result of man-made. Wars are man-made, and wars cause a lot of problems. Say, people fled from one country to another. They need help. And many countries help these migrants. Can our DRF be used to help these migrants? As for the funding of $40 million, I hope the administration, in considering the application by the agencies, will have a clear criteria, and also there should be detailed guidelines. The money will only be given to the victims direct. The disaster relief funds will only be given to the victims instead of given to the local government. A president can curse his own people. Philippines is a very religious country, and why God allow the innocent people to suffer, and the one who should die has not yet died. Now, as for the agencies who dare to apply, it's very difficult. In fact, they are in difficult condition. The Philippines in a confusion, without the support of the government, without the support of the military. How can these relief agencies provide help to victims? Now, it can be relief can be immediate relief to those who are suffering, say, who are injured, who are seriously ill. They need emergency relief. And there is also the need to prevent the deterioration of the situation. That's about public health and hygiene. The third is disaster, post-disaster redevelopment. As for the Sichuan incident, we have seen a lot. We have seen a lot of public money wasted, millions of dollars spent on putting up buildings. Finally, these buildings were torn down. The use of public money is a concern. Every time the administration says that it will step up monitoring, it will be very careful in its approval of funds. But the Sichuan incident showed that money has been wasted. We don't want to see a repetition in helping the Philippines. How can the administration make sure that money is well spent and is spent on the victims, but not affected by corruption? The director, would you please repeat? We don't give directly to the government. We give the money to the relief agencies. The relief agencies do not work through the local governments to distribute the relief materials, and we will not give out money. How can you make sure that the agencies have the capability? It's just like a civil war. I heard that those who stepped off the plane, they were robbed. It is a confusion. It is not very simple. If the relief agencies have to get cooperation partners, they have to spell out who are their partners. Having heard Mr. Chan's view, we will pay attention to this point. Next, Mr. Leung Yu-chung. Thank you, Chairman. Concerning the funding for disaster relief in respect of the typhoon, had it not been the bad attitude of the Filipino president, there would have been less controversy. In the past 3 years, because of the happenings in the past 3 years, people have a different view. My ward office has received phone calls from the citizens asking us not to support the funding. The attitude of the government and the president's attitude in particular should not be considered together with the suffering of the people. We should help the victims, and we should help them as soon as possible. As for the opposition to the funding for Sichuan, the reason for opposition was that the money would be given to the provincial government, and therefore we didn't support that. This time, the administration repeatedly tells us the money gives to the money is to be given to the NGOs, and the NGOs will give direct relief, and it is not to give money to the people, but to give relief materials to the people, and that will go a long way to do away with corruption. But there is still concern whether the materials will be given into the hands of the victims. They may be that the agencies may be asked to produce photos or other proofs. Concerning your monitoring, you're rather passive. You wait for information provided by the agencies. But do you take the initiative to conduct any inspection? Do you demand for certain evidence so as to address people's concern that the materials will not be given into the hands of the victims? Well, thank you, Mr. Leung, for the question. The advisory committee did discuss the matter. I hope you understand that when the disaster is going on, it is difficult for the advisory committee to conduct a site visit, which may hinder the relief efforts. We should not underestimate the administrative cost for conducting a site visit. We need to find a suitable balance. In scrutinizing the proposals, we are extremely cautious. We have to be convinced that where will the disaster relief materials go? After the disaster has happened, we should not interfere with disaster relief efforts. That is, there may not be any road, there may not be any transportation. The cost of visit is very high. Of course, I take this point. I take your point. And we may be causing trouble if we conduct a site visit, but after the incident, after the disaster, we may not need to spend a lot of effort on that. But will you adopt a more balanced approach? Mr. Chairman, we can bring it back to the advisory committee for consideration.
Next, Mr. Lee. Well, Chairman, I have to declare my interest. I'm a member of the RFAC. I support the injection of the fund of $400 million to the DLF. So it doesn't mean that this $400 million will all be given to the Philippines. I am a member of the advisory committee only. I cannot speak on behalf of the whole advisory committee, but I would like to say that I do not support the direct donation of money to the Filipino government. I do not believe the Filipino government can do a good job when it comes to emergency relief. And also the $40 million should not be all given to the Philippines. So I'm sure the AC will be looking at the applications one by one very carefully. The hostage incident has been lingering for 3 years, and no satisfactory resolution has been provided yet. But this is a large-scale disaster, so we have the responsibility to lend out our helping hand. I also have a Filipino domestic helper at my home, and she has been working for me for many years. Whenever I see Filipino helpers in Hong Kong, I always feel that Hong Kong people are blessed, and on the contrary, the Filipinos are really miserable because they have such a bad president. In particular, the Filipino women do not have much choice. They have to go to a foreign country to work as a domestic helper. This is really a miserable choice, and now they are hit by this natural disaster, and we are in Hong Kong, we're so blessed, we should really help them. And according to past experience, the grants will be used for the purchase of humanitarian aid, including rice, oil, bed, blankets. These are basic needs for the victims. And the relief organizations can only use 5% of the grant for administrative costs. So most of the money will be used for the purchase of relief materials. I have talked to my Filipino helper, and she also comes from that affected area. She says that the number of deaths will definitely be more than 2,000, and a lot of people may die soon because they do not have food. So international aid is really important, and I hope that the relevant relief organizations can start their relief programs as soon as possible. Dr. Helena Wong, after listening to Ms. Story Lee, I know that she would support this funding because this is not a G2G effort, and the money will be given to NGOs. Well, I remember the last application for funds for Sichuan, so how come last time she thought G2G was okay? How come she's adopting a different standard? No matter whether it's the mainland government or the Sichuan government or the Filipino governments, they have something in common. That is corruption. We query where the money will go. Will the money reach the victims? But it seems that we are very forgetful. The DAB supported the G2G efforts last time. The Democratic Party supports this application for a transfer of funds. We have been arguing for a long time today, and there are two important issues. First of all, about justice. Second, about charity. Justice has not been done. For the Manila hostage incident, well, our president has just written to the parliament of the Philippines. He asked the parliament to explain to the victims, to make compensation to the victims, to do them justice, to apologize to them. Well, all these have not been resolved, so justice has not been done yet. Now, Hong Kong people are really ambivalent. We want them to give us compensation, but now so many people have died because of the typhoon. They lack food, they lack medicine. So this is a challenge to our conscience. We want justice to be done. However, we also have to respond to the victims. Now they are waiting for help in the affected areas. Yes, we want justice, but we also want charity. We cannot fold our hands and watch people die. So I support this application for injection of funds, and through NGOs and relief organizations, we hope that the relief materials can reach the victims. Well, we still have a travel alert against the Philippines. Well, when the relief organization members go to the Philippines, will there be another hostage incident? Now there is looting there. So will the lives of the relief organization members be threatened? Well, while we support the government's application this time, I also want to know whether the government has adopted any measures so as to ensure that the relief teams will be safe when they are in the Philippines and they can come back in one piece. Because this is really a dangerous task. How can governments help them? Well, many experienced organizations know how to handle disasters like this. And now their frontline workers are already inspecting the situations there. If their safety is threatened, well, we can extend help to them. But these relief organizations are very professional, so they can make their own assessment of the situation. Mr. Michael Tian. Well, I have been listening for quite a while today. No matter whether it's the pan-democrats or the pro-establishment camp, most of their members support this transfer of funds. Well, in Hong Kong, some people are still against this. Well, they think that the hostage incident is not resolved. So how come we are helping the Filipinos? But I've also heard other voices. Well, some members of the public know how to differentiate these two issues. Now, this is a humanitarian aid. It should not be mixed with a political issue. I think this is something precious in Hong Kong. That is Hong Kong people's values. They are reasonable. They know how to tell a difference among different issues. So I am really proud of Hong Kong people. But lately, you know that, well, Hong Kong people have been very angry at the government of the Philippines. However, many people told me that this is a problem with Aquino. This is not the Filipino people's problems. In particular, we have seen this disaster on TVs. We've seen people suffering from hunger and the lack of water. So we understand that the devastation has been extensive and serious. Well, I've been listening to members. Actually, they have asked all the questions that I wanted to ask. And the government has given a lot of answers, so I really don't know what else I can ask you. Well, you have clarified that this is not a G2G effort, and the money will be given to relief organizations, and the relief organizations have partners, and these partners are not local governments. So it seems that the money will be able to reach the hands of the victims. So the New People Party supports this effort. This shows that electoral members and Hong Kong people are compassionate. But some people have asked me, now if you have given grants to these relief organizations, they have their partners. Well, for 5% administrative cost is really not much. So can the organizations really work with such a low administrative cost? And if you need to go to these places, maybe the administrative cost is very high. So can you ensure that these partners good? Do they have a track record? Have we been making donations to the Philippines? Yes, many times, mainly because of typhoons. So are they the same relief organizations? At this moment, we have not received applications from the relief organizations yet, but next week the applications will come in. In the press conference, we have already told the press these relief organizations are very experienced, including World Vision and the Salvation Army. So they have long-term partners, right? Well, every time we will look at the situation again, but these relief organizations have their own international networks, and they know how to distribute the relief aids. Dr. Fernando Zhang, I support the application for funding. I understand that the money will be given to local relief organizations when they make an application, and the money will be used for disaster relief in the Philippines, and the victims of the typhoon will be helped. We want to tell the world that Hong Kong will go all out to help natural disaster victims. In particular, the Philippines has a very close relationship with Hong Kong. For the hostage incidents, we will continue to work to seek justice. We will seek compensation from the Filipino government. We want justice to be done to the victims. But now we are talking about the Filipino people, so we need to help them. And I would like to declare interest. I also have a Filipino domestic helper at home. It's fortunate that her family is not affected directly by this typhoon. However, we have over 100,000 Filipino helpers in Hong Kong. We hope that they can get help. We understand that the relief organizations have set up hotlines, and they are providing both physical and psychological help to for Filipino helpers in Hong Kong, trying to look for their family and members, etc. So for this disaster relief fund, will we be giving grants to these relief organizations? That is, they are not going to the Philippines to provide emergency relief, but they are providing service in Hong Kong to the Filipino domestic helpers. So would you also be giving them money to do this? Well, for the disaster relief fund, we would mainly provide materials to disaster victims. We are talking about over 100,000 Filipino domestic helpers in Hong Kong. And many of them are very anxious because they are unable to contact their families back home. So if these relief organizations are going to the Philippines, can they provide this kind of service to the Filipino helpers in Hong Kong? That is, can they carry messages, or can they try to contact their family members? That may cost a lot of money. So can you be more flexible? Can you allow the relief organizations to provide this kind of service? Well, according to the 93 LegCo resolution, it seems that this kind of service is not covered. Well, there are over 200,000 Filipino helpers in Hong Kong, and I think many relief organizations would provide all sorts of services to them. Unfortunately, this is not within the applicable area of the fund. But I'm sure there are other donations that can help other organizations to provide this type of service. So if the disaster relief fund cannot help in this way, maybe other government departments can help.
In respect of providing local relief agencies to provide assistance in this regard. And I also urge the employers in Hong Kong to be kind to their domestic helpers and assist their domestic helpers. And if the helpers have any urgent need say even if they want to go back to the Philippines to meet their families, the Hong Kong employers should be try to be as generous as possible. If members don't have other questions, I'll put the proposal in the item to the vote. With those in favor of SCR 2013-14 number 34, please raise your hands. I claim a division. Please ring the bell.
好，各位現在開始表。
Voting begins. Before I announce results, please check your votes. Voting is closed. Results displayed. "47 present, 45 for, 1 against, no abstention. The motion is carried. Let me remind members that we still have 2 more items for discussion, and I hope you try to avoid duplications when you ask questions. And I would like to know who would like to speak in respect of the next item. Please press the button so that I can make an arrangement for that. We move on to Head 44, Environmental Protection Department, Subhead 700, General Non-Recurrent. New item, one-off subsidy for retrofitting refuse collection vehicles to meet the new equipment standards. Members invited to approve the creation of a new commitment of $18.8 million for providing a one-off subsidy to assist private refuse collection vehicle owners to retrofit their vehicles for meeting the new equipment standards. To answer members' questions, we have the following government officials, and they are Ms. Howard Chen, Deputy Director of Environmental Protection; Dr. Ellen Chan, Assistant Director of Environmental Protection;
張明強先生，
and Mr. Michael Ching, Office in Charge, Refuse Transfer Station Department of EPD. 8 members have indicated that they want to ask questions. I will give 2 minutes each, 3 minutes, okay? If you allow me to extend the meeting by a quarter of an hour, i.e. 6:45. Mr. Wong Ho-Ing. Mr. Chairman, this is a late application. I will support it. It should have been done. The LCVs should receive help to improve their facilities to prevent leachate and also bad smell. In fact, leachate and bad smell are causing trouble to the drivers and also the other road users and also the people along the route. Do you have enough time to do the retrofitting? I support the funding. Next. He has not answered my question. Now, can he do it within a short period of time? What if they do it more than 9 months? Chairman, you don't need to hurry. Yes, please, Director.
呢9個月時間呢，就係申請嘅資助嗰個計劃。
I thank Mr. Wong for the question. The 9 months are for application. The whole program will last until first quarter of 2015. According to our pilot in August, we believe there is enough time. But we will watch the progress. If need be, we have flexibility to adjust the timetable. But we hope that the owners will apply ASAP so that we can arrange for the retrofitting. Like Mr. Wong, we want to complete the project ASAP. Well, I'm a bit assured, and I urged the sector to apply as soon as possible. Next, Mr. Tommy Chung.
我問幾個不過好快嘅問題啦。
Mr. President, Mr. Chairman, just a quick point. Now, it will be done until 2015. That's too slow. Since we are to pay the money, can we encourage the owners to do it first, and then we pay them back. That will speed up the process. They don't need to wait for our money. I hope the EPD can consider that. If you are able to give the money to them early, that's good. But if you can't give them money early, then ask them to do it first, and then they give you the bills and you pay the bills. Now, Mr. Bernard Chan is looking at landfills. The Liberal Party talked to him earlier. He said that very soon the RCVs will have to be replaced. I think $10,000 aren't a big sum. If the RCVs are old, you force them to retrofit the old RCVs with $500,000. Why can't you help them to replace the RCVs? Now in Korea, in Germany, we've seen new RCVs which are very environment friendly. Is it possible to ask them to replace their old and worn-out vehicles? Why can't you subsidize them to buy more environment-friendly vehicles? They will not be smelly. If they buy new ones, then you don't need retrofitting. Say for the Euro Mark X, I really don't know. They even have they even run on gas rather than on diesel. I mean, they run on LPG rather than diesel. So will you consider getting money to help them to even replace their vehicles? That will be even more cost effective. The director will consider that. Chairman, there are two questions. I thank Mr. Chairman for the questions. Completing the project by the first quarter of 2015 is based on the pilot scheme. It's also the demand of the trade who asks for more time to allow the garages to do the retrofitting. This is based on the time needed to do the retrofitting. We want to do it ASAP, of course. Therefore, we shorten the application time to 9 months. And then everything will have to be completed within the first quarter of 2015. We hope the trade will complete the retrofitting as soon as possible. That will, in fact, improve the service. As a replacement of RCVs, according to our understanding, the chassis and the engine are separately procured. If they can buy the new engine, European engine, they can still fit it to the body. It really depends on the condition of the hopper or the body. Now, after they've replaced the engine, they can still make use of the hopper. A quick point. He has not answered my question. Can you ask the owners to do it first, and then you reimburse them instead of waiting for your approval and get the money and then do it? Is it possible to conduct reimbursement?
Well, for the pilot scheme, we have already done that. That is, we have already given funds to some owners so that they can do the retrofitting. But now there is an application procedure because the EMSD will have to talk to the workshops and try to put together plans for retrofitting, because we want the retrofitted VLCs to meet our new equipment standards. So if the vehicles are not assessed by the EMSD and then they start retrofitting their vehicles, then the retrofitted vehicles may not meet the new equipment standards. So they have to join the scheme, and then they talk to the EMSD, and then we can ensure that the vehicles will be up to standard. Ms. Alice Mack, I have two questions. For this subsidy, will it help all the private RCVs in Hong Kong? And for the retrofitting work, they will be done by workshops, and the vehicles will be inspected by EMSD. But if there are complaints after the retrofitting, that is, there's still dripping of leachate, there's still an odor nuisance, then what can be done? That is, if the retrofitted vehicles are not satisfactory, what will be done afterwards? Well, this subsidy is to cover all the vehicles with a rear compactor compartment. We have about 500 of them in Hong Kong. It is because of this rear compactor compartment, so that's why there is odor and dripping of leachate. So for this 500 odd LCVs, about 300 of them are private LCVs, and about 200 of them do not have a metal tailgate cover and a wastewater sump tank. In August, we had a pilot scheme. We talked to the workshops and the industry. We hope that after retrofitting, we can solve the odor and leachate problem. So we think, well, after the pilot scheme, technically, this scheme is practicable. The problems of odor and dripping of leachate can be resolved. Well, but of course, they have to operate properly. If there is a cover, they do not close it, then there will still be a problem. So if there's still odor and dripping of leachate in accordance with the present ordinance, we can sue the LCV owner. And after the ordinance has been revised, if the LCVs in the future are not equipped with a metal tailgate cover and a wastewater sump tank, we can sue the LCV owners. So we will discuss with the industry and the workshops so as to ensure that the retrofitting will be proper and it will be done to the satisfaction of the EMSD. The workshops will be doing maintenance. Well, they have been doing maintenance for the LCVs, so in the future they will also be doing the same. Mr. Poon Siu Ping, well, basically I support this application. I would like to ask several questions. In the paper, you're talking about 500 odd LCVs, and over 100 of them are government LCVs. So are these government LCVs complying with the present standards? And you say that the industry welcomes this. So do all the members of the industry support this? Because this will last until September. So if some members of the industry do not comply, what will be done? Well, there are guidelines, as mentioned in the paper. So if they do not comply, then they cannot meet the new equipment standards. So what will the government do then? Thank you, Chairman. As for the FEHD's LCVs, they all comply with the new equipment standards. They already have tailgate covers and wastewater sump tanks. Now some private LCVs are still not retrofitted. So that's why we are seeking funding for this purpose. So when we talk to the industry about this, we have consulted many members of the industry, and the major trade unions in the industry support our plan. But of course, we cannot ensure that all the LCVs will be retrofitted in time. So when we launch this subsidy scheme, we will amend the relevant laws so as to ensure that all the LCVs will be retrofitted with tailgate cover and sump tank in the future. So we will adopt a two-pronged approach. We will subsidize the industry and we will also legislate. Mr. Michael Tian. Thank you, Chairman. I would like to praise the EPD. I think they are responding very fast. I remember several months ago, the government tried to lobby me for the approval of the extension of the landfills. And I said one thing very clearly, that is they have to legislate to regulate LCVs, and then I will support them. They sent me a letter undertaking that they would do this. So if the bill is to be submitted to us by the end of this year, and if the whole plan can be completed within 9 months, I think that is indeed fast. But I would like to share with you something. In my district, in particular, for the residents living in the vicinity of Long Ku Wan, they are very concerned about this because the LCVs have been going through passing the village for more than 10 years, and it's really smelly. So they hope that this problem can be resolved because before the landfill is extended. Now, you are going to legislate by the end of this year. I don't know when exactly you will do that. So I think after legislation, the LCV owners will comply, right? So can you do it earlier? Now, if you can legislate by the middle of the year and the LCVs can all be retrofitted, then by the end of the year, it may be easier for us to support the extension of the landfills. I think that in early next year, you will be coming back for the application of the landfill extension. So if this piece of legislation has not been passed by then, it's quite difficult for me to support the government. Well, for legislation on tailgate cover and sump tank is actually quite simple because it's just amending a subsidiary legislation. So we should be able to do it by the end of this year. Yes, we understand Mr. Tian's concern. We will try to speed up, and we are already doing something with the pilot scheme. If members approve this funding application this time, then we can start our work right away. Well, the workshops have to carry out the retrofitting work, and it would take about 5 to 7 working days. Well, there are not many workshops that would do this kind of work for LCVs. So I think there are some difficulties for the industry, but we will try our best to speed up the whole project. Ms. Sitho, well, I would like to expose the government's secret. Actually, they are not responding fast. Well, last time we were talking about the extension of the landfill in Changguano, and the country park would be eroded. Well, they should have done it at that time, and now they are only doing it now because now they want to extend their landfills. So that's why they are doing it this time. So they have been dragging their feet for 3 years. Chairman, well, the government cannot do things like this. And when there is a problem, they just target that problem. Well, I think the government cannot just focus on trivial things like this. Well, after the LegCo has approved the extension of the landfills will be saturated in a few years, and then there will be another problem. So how can Hong Kong go on like this? So every 10 years or so we will have a war over the extension of landfills. So I think in the future, each year you should use your recurrent expenses to make improvements on this. So I think the financial secretary should not be so stingy. In the future, you are saying that you will be charging waste fees, and our cover is full of money. So I think each year you should be spending $1 billion or so that more primary jobs can be created, so that there can be more cleaners and waste collectors, and then we can have a recycling industry in Hong Kong, and even our young people can enjoy more employment opportunities. Next, Dr. Helena Wong. The Democratic Party supports this application, and LCV's private LCVs be retrofitted. But I have some questions. Now, when you amend the subsidiary legislation, will you state clearly that after the implementation of this program, only LCVs with tailgates cover and some tank will be allowed on the roads? For LCVs without such facilities, they will not be allowed to renew their licenses. This is question number one. And as for question number two, if such facilities are retrofitted onto the LCVs, but the relevant workers are lazy, they do not cover they do not close the tailgates cover, then what will happen? As for the warranty, it will only last for 1 year. Afterwards, the LCV owners would have to talk to the workshops themselves. I'm worried that after 1 year's time, if they do not want to pay for maintenance, then there will be the problems of odor and dripping of leachate again. And thirdly, I also hope that after investing such money, the LCV's nuisance can be allayed. How can you ensure that after retrofitting, such LCVs will continue to provide service in Hong Kong and they will not be sold to other places? Well, Chairman, for amending the subsidiary legislation, maybe I can ask Dr. Ellen Chan to answer that question. And how can we ensure that these retrofitted vehicles will continue to serve Hong Kong? Actually, for most of the private LCVs, they are FEHD's contractors, or they are providing service to the private sector. So they have been doing business in Hong Kong. So we have reasons to believe that if there is such a need in Hong Kong, they will continue to provide the service in Hong Kong and they will not sell their vehicles. As for the legislative amendments, Dr. Chen can answer that question. Well, for the amendments of legislation, will we ensure that there will be no vehicles that are under the power that will run on our roads? Well, these LCVs will all be going to the refuse transfer stations and new designated waste disposal facilities. We may be building incinerators in the future and other facilities. So these LCVs are going to these designated destinations, so they will not be just driving around on the road. Mr. Tan Ka-Piu.
Now there is a scheme to phase off diesel engines. They will soon be scrapped. Is there any information on that? Concerning the number of garages that can do retrofitting, they are very limited. How limited are they? Can they do the retrofitting for these 270 plus 60, altogether 330? I'm afraid that they may take 2 weeks to do the retrofitting, and therefore the trade cannot do business. How can you make sure that the retrofitting is efficiently done? And what about maintenance? That's another concern. Environmental hygiene business has a very thin profit margin. Everybody wants to save cost. How often does a LCV need to do large-scale maintenance? Is there any supervision? Now, concerning the private contractors, how many of the vehicles are Euro 1 or pre-Euro? We don't have details. Now, in fact, there is a separation between the engine and also the trailer. They can, if it is a pre-Euro vehicle, then the engine can be replaced, whereas the trailer can be fit in. The old trailer can still be used. We are going to fit the tailgate cover and also the wastewater sump tank to the trailer. So the engine replacement program doesn't affect our program. According to our understanding, there are less than 10 garages that can do the retrofitting. Now, the trade prefers familiar garages. In the market, there are not too many such garages, just more than a handful. They have limited capacity. Therefore, we want to complete the retrofitting as early as possible, but we need to allow the garages adequate time. We expect that within a year they can complete the whole process. These refuse collection vehicles are maintained regularly. According to the trade, these vehicles are maintained from time to time. During the maintenance period, they may borrow or rent LCVs from other companies. They will make similar arrangements during the retrofitting period. The representatives of the trade say that the operators are willing to help. In fact, the trade association is willing to help. If members don't have further questions, I'll put the proposal to the vote. Will those in favor of FCR 2113-14, number 32 proposals, please raise their hands. Thank you. Those against, please raise their hands. No. I think the question is agreed by a majority of the members who have voted. I declare the motion passed. We have the last item. Let us finish with it. Let us don't need the officials to come again. Please press the button if you want to speak. The third item, FCR 2013-14, number 33, Capital Works Reserve Fund Head 701, Land Acquisition. Extra gratia allowance for permitted occupiers of licensed domestic structures and survey domestic, or rather, for enhancement to 4 existing types of extra allowance for clearies affected by government's development clearance exercises by relaxing the current eligibility criteria and revising the basis of assessment, and an extension of applicability of the extra allowance for permitted occupiers of licensed domestic structures and surveyed domestic squatters affected by clearance to eligible clearies who opt for the extra allowance in lieu of rehousing to public housing units. The development panel was briefed on the 22nd of July 2013. To answer members' questions, we have the following officials, and they are Mr. Thomas Chan, Deputy Secretary for Development, Mr. Login Wai, Principal Assistant Secretary, Ms. Benedict Lin, Director of Lands, and Mr. Law Hin Weng, Assistant Director of Lands. Mrs. Tony Chair. Thank you, Chairman. On behalf of the Development Panel, I would like to make a verbal report. The Development Panel had a special meeting on the 23rd of July 2013 to discuss this proposal. The panel generally welcomes the administration's proposal to improve the 4 types of EGAs and relax the eligibility criteria and basis of calculation. The panel also notes that the administration will improve the resettlement arrangement so that those who are eligible for rehousing can have wider choices. Members have given the following views and concerns. A. The administration should comprehensively review the mechanism for EGA and rehousing arising from clearance, in particular the arrangement for non-indigenous people. The administration should actively consider the resettlement in situ requirement by the non-indigenous residents. The administration should step up its efforts in implementing farming rehabilitation projects to enable affected farmers to continue farming. The above are the views of the development panel, and I would like to express my own opinion. With regard to the EGAs given by owners and users affected by clearance, the administration does this in order to facilitate land resumption. But there are cases in which illegal occupation exists. The administration has not done its part properly in terms of land management. Now, is the administration going to step up its effort in land management so as to avoid unnecessary compensation, so as to make land resumption smoother? I hope the administration can address this question. The Director. Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. With regard to illegal structures, those registered before 1982 are tolerated. The EGAs in question are also related to the occupiers of these illegal structures. If they are affected by public works, if they are cleared, they will be given an EGA. As for those not registered in 1982, the illegal structures will be cleared, and we will take enforcement action. Squatter control is a policy, and we can follow the matter up at the development panel. Mr. Tommy Cheung, I will just be quick. The Liberal Party supports the proposal. No further questions, and yes, one more. Mr. Leung. Dr. Fernando Cheung first.
知道即係政府收地要
The land resumption usually leads to conflicts. Compensation affects that process. Land is resumed, say, for public facilities. Land is resumed for development projects. The mechanism doesn't cover compensation in NT West and NT North. The recent case was Lian Tang, and I found that there were many conflicts. I think this mechanism is similar to the arrangement with Lian Tang. One conflict is that there is a big difference between the treatment for indigenous residents and non-indigenous residents. With the approval of this mechanism, Would that mean that there will be a different standard for there will be a different standard for indigenous residents, and this is only for non-indigenous residents? Will there be a big difference? Well, let me stress that this is for dealing with temporary structures like license structures and also survey structures in 1982 or before. The EGA is not in response to the distinction between indigenous residents and indigenous non-indigenous residents. As for resumption of property with good title, we have a compensation mechanism, and there is no distinction between indigenous inhabitants and non-indigenous inhabitants. We have an established mechanism, and we also have a set of removal arrangements. The EGA has no distinction between indigenous inhabitants and non-indigenous inhabitants. As for landowners and property owners, they are not covered by the present proposal. Mr. Chairman, the conflict is this. The inhabitants, be they indigenous or non-indigenous, they have been living there over many years. Now time is up. We have a deadline. We only have 2 minutes for Mr. Leung Yiu Chung. Can I ask again? Before you come in, we've already set the deadline. We want to complete our discussion of all the items. If you can ask for written reply. Mr. Leung Yiu Chung, I give you 1 minute. Why? Why 1 minute? We withdraw the deadline. Before you come, we've already set the deadline. And you only press the button after I've drawn the line. I oppose the proposal. I urge the administration to withdraw this. Concerning this document, it is not for the land resumption in NT West. This is for this is EGA, a general EGA. So will it apply to all the districts in Hong Kong? Have they consulted the people affected? They are the people at the receiving end. Why can't you consult them? Why didn't you consult them if you haven't done so? Is the present proposal arising from the recent 2 large-scale resumptions? Well, I can confirm that the present proposal is applied generally to those clearies affected by large-scale public works projects which require land resumption. As for NT Northeast NDA, in July we went before the development panel and we proposed a special EGA which will be drawn up specifically for the Northeast NDA.
Just now, Mr. Leung mentioned whether we have consulted the affected inhabitants. Now, we have actually made reference to our recent clearance exercises. So when we review the EGA mechanism, including the eligibility criteria and basis of calculation, we have already considered all the relevant points, but we cannot assess the number of people that will be affected, and we do not know how many public works projects will be conducted in the future. So that's why we cannot conduct a comprehensive consultation. Well, because now it's already 6:45, so I don't think we should handle this item anymore. So if there are more questions, we will entertain those questions at the next meeting. So thank you for attending.